All right, hello everyone, and welcome to yet another Renegade interview. I'm your host, Chris Whippant. Today, I am joined by a designer whose games I've played as long as I've been in board gaming, and that's Mr. Matt Hyra. How you doing, Matt?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome,
Thanks for
awesome.
having me on your show.
I know this is pretty cool. It's kind of our show though, because you're part of the Renegade family now. So you
Well,
know
you're the
that's
host. That makes it your show. But anyway, yeah, we get it. We get it. It's a family.
it totally is. It's the long distance family, but nonetheless,
Right.
but still very fun. So I'm not exaggerating when I say some of the first games I played. I played DC Deck Builder long before I played Dominion. Which
Oh,
is
wow. Okay.
which is kind of weird, right? That doesn't seem normal, but it just so happened that that's the way it came out.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, usually people get into the hobby because they spot something that they really get into, and when it's an IP like DC Comics, that might just, hey, wow, what's this brand new thing on the shelf? I got to check it out. You might not even know what a deck building game is or that Dominion started them all, but yeah.
Yeah, that was back when I had one local game shop.
Mm,
Wasn't really buying things like Barnes and Noble had it. Like that. That's how I found it.
right,
You know,
right.
but it was definitely something fun. And when we first started getting into playing games, and the whole idea of deck building was very cool and unique. What was it like? Harken back all the way to the DC days. What was it like to
Oh,
try and come up with something fresh like that?
sure. Well, with an intellectual property, an IP that's owned by someone else, you always have to be careful to follow the rules of their universe, right? You
Hmm.
can't have Batman slaughtering people in the street and Superman, cracking skulls all over the place. But that's easy because I'm a DC fan, so I already know these things, right?
There you go.
So job one is to get to know the IP if you don't already know it. Fortunately, I usually know the IPs I work on pretty well because I'm a fan of them. But the first thing I try to do is deliver an experience to the fan that they can't already get.
Hmm.
Okay, so what that means is in, for instance, DC deck building, you get to play as one of the superheroes. So when you're reading the comic books, you can kind of pretend to be Batman or Wonder Woman or
Right.
Aquaman if you're into swimming, but you're not really them. They're doing things that are unexpected. You're not telling the story, they are. So I wanted you to be able to tell the story by taking on the role of that character and competing against other players for superiority. One other thing, sometimes I even make games based on other games, like a video game or something.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that the game is a new experience.
Hmm.
I don't want to try to retread the video game because the video game is going to do it better, faster, and better and with better sound effects. So,
Sure.
for instance, if I made a board game about Diablo or something, I wouldn't want to make a dungeon crawl game because you can already do that,
Hmm.
right?
Interesting.
So that's how I go. That's how I look at it at the start, like you
Interesting.
say.
So let's harkening back to that time. There was also very few deck builders kind of in the marketplace at that point in time. I mean, we did have Dominion and what maybe Ascension at that point. Had that like really hit?
Ascension, yeah, Ascension actually pioneered the use of the single deck,
Right.
the mixed up single deck, whereas Dominion had done it as piles. The first
Hmm.
time I ever saw some people playing Dominion at a convention, I said, "Oh my goodness, what is going on here? What a terrible mistake! They've separated all the cards." I couldn't believe it, but I didn't. It's like, what are all these piles? This looks horrible, but eventually Ascension figured it out that oh, maybe a random deck provides for a little bit better replayability, things
Right.
like that, without all the setup involved. Dominion, you can get good replayability if you own a lot of expansions by mixing your stacks, but you still have to like pre-evaluate the everything in the game before you start to really figure out your strategy.
Right.
When it's randomized and the cards are coming up a few at a time, then you have to react to the current situation and make the best of what you can.
When you design these games, do you try to stick to using that kind of the lineup as you call it, or have you experimented using any of the piles or anything along the way?
Um, I haven't done a straight up pile game
Hmm.
like Dominion, but I think every deck builder I've done has had some additional piles involved.
Okay.
Like in DC deck building, there's the kick stack and various other. There's plenty of variations on the kick stack. Essentially, a kick stack is essentially a a small stack of cards that you can buy if you can't afford anything in the lineup or there's
Right.
nothing in the lineup you could possibly make use of. So most games have something like that, and DC had things like the kick stack, the weakness stack, the supervillain stack. So I tried to innovate with as much as I could.
Right. So you kind of
But
get the best
I've
of both worlds.
Yeah, and I've even innovated on the lineup, like my Attack on Titan deck building game. You actually it's a cooperative game versus the deck and the Titans inside of it, and you actually have to protect each of the five lineup slots. Those have little wall tokens there that you have to. And the big Titans will actually show up on the other side of the wall. Actually, all the Titans show up on the other side of the wall, and you actually have to sometimes move your character around in the lineup and even go over the wall to fight the Titans. So I've done little spatial relations and your character on the board, and you can only buy cards where your character's at. So I took that to the next level with DC Rebirth, which is a
Okay.
cooperative campaign where the lineup is actually in a circle anchored by five locations, oversized locations, and the lineup is actually in between each of the locations. So that makes for 10 spaces on the board, and you'll move your character around to fight villains, keep them away from their destination, find the cards you need to build up your deck, and just and work together with your teammates.
Awesome. I love the idea that it's not just a row, that you're trying to play with it and experiment with it and do different new
Mm-hmm.
things. I think that's pretty awesome. Now, you
Yeah.
don't spend all your time doing cards. You've also done some board games too. One of which,
Plenty.
right? The one that I kind of thought was pretty cool was GKR. You did the heavy hitters
Oh yeah,
um,
GKR heavy hitters. Yeah.
for Weta Workshop. What was it like
Mm-hmm.
trying to, you know, I mean, they're brand new. They're just trying to figure things out. They're trying to make this game
Right.
that ends up being over the top. What was that process like?
Well, that involved a lot of meetings and get-togethers at places like Gamma and other
Hmm.
conventions, and just figuring out what they wanted because it's an IP game based on their IP, which was brand new. So I was able to help out a little bit and guide a little bit of how the IP would flesh out, just based on the method of gameplay.
Right.
So they wanted a miniatures game. They wanted a big hulking miniatures on the board, and so I was able to convince them to add in some support bots that would support the big heavy hitter, and then they wanted to have a kind of a collapsible play a board. So I worked that out where you're actually tagging buildings to try to demolish them and take the resources of those buildings, all the copper wiring and whatnot. This is a post-apocalyptic world, so they actually have these little gladiatorial combats over salvage rights. So that was something that they provided, and I worked within the idea of these hyper commercialized events. Imagine NASCAR to the death kind of thing.
Gotcha.
You know. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It struck me. I vividly remember being at Gen Con. It was 50. It was the Gen Con 50 year, and that
Mm.
being out on display, and it was
Oh, yeah.
everything that you kind of wanted all of the mech games to be. Like it was
Yeah.
absolutely gorgeous. I didn't get a chance to play it at that point, but it was
Yeah, there were long lists of signups to play the demo. Yeah, but yeah, I've always enjoyed giant robots from my childhood and whatnot. So it was an easy fit for me.
Awesome. Maybe we'll put a pin in that one because I have a feeling that may come up again later in our conversation. So.
Okay.
So you got to play around with some pretty cool IPs. Like you did, like the most recently, I think, kind of the whole collaboration with the Cartoon Network. That kind of
Yeah,
all those games because you started with Adventure Time and it just kind of
right.
and then you pretty much did every Rick and Morty game that I'm aware of at least at this point. Um,
I did all but one. Yeah. Although I was instrumental in the one that didn't have my name on it. Yeah. So.
Awesome. So what's it like trying to take something, I mean, super two dimensional like a cartoon is, and even shorter form than like, say all of the comic books and things you've done in the past, and trying to bring that to life in a game. How is that different?
Right. Well, wow. I mean, the Rick and Morty games were very different in that most of them were based on a single half an hour episode. And by
Right?
half an hour, I mean 22 minutes,
Right.
right? So, I just look for elements that have a little gametic quality to it. Typically, it's easier to figure out where the game lies when there's action in an episode that is kind of repeated.
Okay.
Okay. If you have an episode where they go from, you know, in the house to a planet to this other weird dimension and then over to a spaceship and over here, you're like, well, what, okay, this is just wagon train to the stars. There's no overarching thing. But when they're doing the kind of a similar thing over and over again, whether that's some conflict, whether
Right.
that's some working towards a particular invention, whether that's like for Anatomy Park, a good one. Hey, it's a park. They're trying to build a park. So let's go ahead and have people build a park inside a human body. How about that?
There you go. And of course, Pickle Rick. I mean, we have to have that.
Right.
And
See, Pickle Rick had repeated actions. Rick is fighting against the Russians and trying to escape, and he has all these travails. He's not going to 9 different locations during the episode. He's
right.
focused on one goal, and there's lots of stumbling blocks in a contained location. So it is possible to make a game out of random stuff that's happening, but it may not feel like any particular experience of the show because
Okay.
the show wasn't really showing you anything. It was just telling a story, which is fine, but it wasn't giving purpose to every scene, right?
Right.
If every scene is random, then, which sometimes happens with Rick and Morty, sometimes he just does extemporaneous,
Yeah.
dialogue, and that's it. Like when he's watching TV, he just makes those up on the fly. So hard to make a game out of that.
Right.
But
How is the creative process for that? Is it more of a hey, we want to do Rick and Morty games, or is it we have these ideas? Like how's it presented to you to work with? Because that's a
sure.
pretty big toy box to play with.
Yeah. Well, we look when you're working with a current IP, and that's something important to talk about. Is old IPs sometimes already have everything established. There
Mm-hmm.
may or may not be anything new happening. Maybe you're just using the classic motif, like Lord of the Rings. You know everything. There
Yep.
isn't any new Lord of the Rings, okay? And I've made Lord of the Rings games. I made several of them. You know everything. So you know exactly the parameters you need to work with, and you know where you're starting, where you're finishing. When it's a when it's a game with an IP that is current and currently running, there is pressure to be current with the seasons. Okay.
Mm.
Now, of course, it's very difficult to have a game that revolves around the first season of a show come out in the first season because that show probably has not established their audience or become popular enough to warrant a game until after the first season. And at that point, then you look back to the first season and make a game or two. And then in the meantime, season 2 comes out, and it might be during season 2, you look at the first few episodes and wonder, well, does any of these have any interesting gametic qualities to them? Any interesting tangents? And you wait for those episodes. And with Rick and Morty, it wasn't hard to find, 1 out of 3 episodes has some kind of gametic quality to it. So at that point, you pitch to Cartoon Network in this case to say, hey, here's a game idea concerning one of these, current episodes. We can get this out in between seasons 2 and 3. So how about it? So
it's just interesting to see how, playful that IP can be and how much fun, and the latitude you can get with that. So pretty awesome. And then we kind of, you kind of start hitting some more serious stuff when we start talking about like The Walking Dead and working on those properties. Were you a fan of that? I mean, is it, comic book fan? Is it, show fan? Like where'd you come into that one?
I mean, I knew about the comic book, but I never read it prior to the show. So I was definitely there at the beginning watching the show, and I've actually watched every episode. I still do, just because I want to see where it's going to go. But I've been, I've got the big omnibus editions, the giant, 600 pagers. So I've been working my way through those. So I've got a couple down, and I think I'm on the third right now. But nice. So a more serious, deadly world does require a little bit, and I've made a couple of Walking Dead games. You usually want to, you want to make it about survival, but a world of, the world of Walking Dead, humans are just as dangerous. So you always want to have that little bit of danger. You can present the game as a zombie game, but you've got to have that human interaction as well, because that is a very important part of the story.
Okay. Interesting. So you've covered a lot, and we've spent a lot of time on your history and everything, and you've worked for several companies around and done some freelance work as well. Fast forward to, I guess it was late last year, early 2020, when you joined Renegade.
2020, really.
Right?
Yeah, just right at the start of the year. I was very tempted by the Vampire the Masquerade expandable card game idea. So it didn't take too much convincing to get me on board. Yeah, I really wanted to give it a try, because I've played the role playing game plenty, and I love the world. So yeah.
So you kind of did a few different things with Vampire than you've done with some of your other properties. What did you do to try to make sure that this stayed both true and to set it apart from a lot of the other stuff that's out?
I think the big one is the multiplayer aspect, because it's an expandable card game, which, people may or may not know what that means. It basically means that you're not going to be, there's no rarity to the cards. You're going to be, if you buy a box and your buddy across town buys a box, you're both going to have the exact same cards. But you can customize your deck. You can, and then choose everything you want, all the vampires for your deck, your agenda, your haven, all that stuff. And then your opponents are going to do that too. So it's the trading card game style, but which is probably a little more familiar to people, but without the rarities and chase cards. Everyone's got the same cards. It's more up to your deck building abilities and your play abilities. And because it's a multiplayer game, even a little bit of negotiation abilities come into play. So that right there, the fact that it's multiplayer makes it different from 95% of the other trading card games out there. Right. Yeah, well, I actually have to give credit to Scott and his initial team, who was kind of toying with it a little bit. Right. They came up with the concept of a city deck, and even the concept of having the Second Inquisition in this, because it's in the U.S., it's the Special Affairs Division, a subsidiary of the Second Inquisition Inc., right? But those were ideas that were already waiting for me when I arrived. So there was already some good foundation there. But I really wanted to take it and run with it.
Awesome.
So I came on board.
Right. So here you are. We've released it. We have it. I believe it's for demo now. If you guys want to check it out. Actually, it's not for.
So not released, but the
Right.
Kickstarter is out. So we released the Kickstarter. The game will be out, December, and then in stores early next year. Right.
Right. That is the hope. And there are it's open gaming available, so you can go in, check out the rules, and try it out if you want to during our convention.
Or
So
just watch.
yeah, just watch. We have several playthroughs. We do Vampire Days, which are pretty cool as well. So not a property that you're going to see us just one and done with. This is something we, Scott loves, you love. I don't see this slowing down anytime soon whatsoever.
No.
So what was the next thing you got your mitts on? Because, you don't just get hired to do one game. We kind of brought you in to do a few. And so we announced at Gen Con that we're bringing on the next one. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that project?
I assume that it's been announced. It's been a secret, I think, up until now, but it's the Power Rangers deck building game. This is kind of also unique in the deck building genre in that it is heroes versus villains. You will play as a hero character or as a villain character, and you will be battling against the other side. So this is a 2 to 4 player game, and indeed it does have a 3-player mode where you can play like one villain versus 2 heroes, or
Right.
One hero versus 2 villains. Did I already say that? I forget. Whatever. You can play 2v1. So there's multiple ways: 1v1, 2v1, or 2v2. So,
Wow.
And the object is to knock your opponent's hit points from 30 to 0, and you'll do that by using cards that have attacks on them and other special abilities to deal damage to your opponents and do other nefarious things to them as well.
Right. Now, how much research do you feel? Because I'm one of the people who came on board Renegade, and I didn't know the whole love that exists behind Power Rangers and the amount of people who are just absolutely in love with this property. I mean, I liked it.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of came across it. I was a little old when it came out, so I kind of skimmed over it. What was your history with the property?
So I had watched it a bit when I was younger, but I know the general outline. But I was also surprised by the number of people who know everything about it. Fortunately, some of those very people work with us. So like Jonathan Ying. And so if there's ever any question that we have, we can just shoot him a quick little message and he'll come back and direct us in the right way. So my instincts are usually good, but when it comes to some of those nitty gritty things, it's nice to have a true expert around.
Right. Has it caused you to want to dive into it more? Because I know I kind of have
Oh, yeah.
found myself wanting to do that as well.
Yeah, I certainly had to go back and watch a lot of episodes and the movies too, because the movies are what a lot of people would possibly what the average person might know is probably more based on the movies, because the movies are a general hit thing.
Right.
It's an extended episode kind of thing, but it hits all the points that the Power Rangers wants to make. So those are good summaries. If there's anyone out there who wants to brush up on their Power Rangers, you can watch one of the movies and you'll be just of the Power Rangers. You won't know about all the different Zord creations and all that, but you'll have the basics.
Awesome. Well, good tips because, as somebody coming in, like I've needed to brush up. And considering in a couple weeks, we're going to be doing Morphin Meetup, where we're actually going to have
Nice.
like real Power Rangers in on a panel or two. It's going to be kind of exciting.
Awesome.
So I can't
That
wait
will be
to
fun.
see.
Hmm.
So this is one of those properties that we've had a lot of fun with, but we've also recently been able to announce that we picked up a few other lines from Hasbro as far as IP goes. Now we talked about that with Elisa a little bit. We talked about GI
Hmm.
Joe, the My Little Pony, and we've picked up a few of those. Transformers being the big robots again, coming back at you, which is
I'm
pretty
glad we can
awesome.
talk about it finally, right?
I know, right? It's kind of
I know.
exciting.
I'm trying to bite my tongue while we're talking about giant robots and how I've liked giant robots since I was a little kid. That means I was a big Transformers fan. Okay, that's what that means. I
Right.
so
You know,
now we
Gundam,
can see
right?
it.
The whole Gundam Wing and all that stuff came on a little bit later.
Hmm.
We kind of grew up with Star Blazers, Transformers, and then Gundam was
Oh
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, that was our
Yep.
life.
Star Blazers was, oh man, I was up every morning during the summer to see that. That's when it came on up in Seattle.
You gotta make sure they get to Iskandar. You gotta find
Of
out.
course. Yep.
So, what are you? I mean, it literally, as we're kind of talking, the ink is still kind of drying on these deals and things. So,
Hmm.
there's the game is not coming out next week, people. It's going to take us some time and to develop
Yeah.
these, sure. But
Hmm.
what are you excited to get your hands on? Because that's some pretty fun stuff to play with.
Yeah. Um, I'm. I don't want to say too much because we're still exploring the space a little bit, but we haven't really started any playtesting. There's nothing has happened quite
Right.
yet. It will soon, but I'm exploring essentially, transforming your character, right?
Oh, cool.
Between Autobot and of course Giant Robot, that we love so much. So um I want to incorporate movement because if you don't have movement in the game, then turning into an Autobot really isn't that meaningful.
Right.
If there's movement in the game and you can move faster as an Autobot, then let's incorporate that into the game and let people transform their character back and forth even multiple times during a turn if they're able to.
Interesting. So I think that's gonna be a real fun one to explore, and I'm kind of really excited to see how that kind of ends up fleshing itself out. I think it's definitely
Right.
exciting. So
Hmm.
have we thought about like the big old let's just throw it all together? Is that even on the table, or is it let's work on these individually and kind of see where they take us first?
Are you talking about individual games or the totality of Transformers property?
Yeah, all of the Transformers. Like, let's just throw them
Oh,
all
okay.
in there at one time. Or is it more, let's just deal
Yeah.
with the core 16 and then kind of build from there?
I think you want to. I think you want to visit the characters that everyone knows. Likely everyone knows. Often,
Right.
most people know Bumblebee, things like that. So you want to hit. I don't think we need 16 playable characters right at the start. Um, and of course, we want to leave some for expansion material if the game is
Sure.
popular, right? So I think we're probably better off featuring 6 to 8 characters at the start. Um, that way, you will also see those characters on some of the cards that you can buy from the lineup or whatever we end up doing. If we did have, you know, 20 different playable characters, you might play a character and never see a card that is thematically linked to your character because not every character could get featured like that. So we
Right.
like to people to have a little more immersive experience. So I do like to keep the character count down a little bit
Right.
instead of just throwing in 30 different transformers in there.
Right. You don't want to run into what kind of can happen, right, with the kick or the punch, where it makes no sense. This person would never do this at this moment in time, but that's the card I have. Try and keep the immersion
Right.
going. Interesting. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that it's going to be exciting the next few years to kind of see what grows out of this, and
Oh
and
yeah.
how these work. So, um, So I just want to finish up on two questions. Number one is no holds barred. You can pick any IP in the world that you love. What would be one that you would want to either work on for the first time or work on again?
Hmm. I mean, you mentioned Star Blazers, but that's been. I think there's been a game or two about that. Um, I can tell you one of. I don't think I would want to revisit anything I've already done. I like the challenge of something new.
Okay.
Um, so I wouldn't necessarily want to go back, but um, one of my all-time favorite shows is only a six-episode British TV series called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. I would love to do a role-playing game based on that because it's such a crazy, crazy world. So, yeah.
You're going to make me
If you're
look
not
that one up.
familiar with it, the elevator pitch is there's some very weird doctors in a hospital, and kind of a hellhole has opened up in the basement, and just a lot of strange things happen at the hospital, and they just have crazy dialogue, and crazy things happen. So it was shot in the early 2000s, pretending that it had been sitting around unseen since the 80s. So everything is very cheesy to it, but
Right.
it's so pure and ridiculous that it is amazing. And it's on YouTube, so just
I'll,
just search for Dark Place, one word, Dark Place.
I will have
Only
to.
six episodes, so
Hey, it's
not
a small
much.
commitment. I can make that.
Yeah.
I've on the Star Blazers note. I have been eyeing the. They made a 1/250th scale Yamato that's about 3 feet
Oh
long.
wow.
I saw
Yeah.
it on one of Adam Savage's shows, and I'm like, oh
Oh
no,
wow.
I want that
Wow.
thing way too much for.
That
Yeah,
would be amazing to hang from the ceiling.
right. It's
You'd
just
you'd need a cathedral ceiling to hang it properly, but man, that'd be cool.
I've got 14-foot ceilings in my living room. No way to get up
Does
there,
does the
mind you.
wave does the wave motion gun turret,
Yeah.
barrel, does that light up? I hope it lights up. So
I would think that a very quick trip with an LED and a very small battery could make
yeah,
that
you're
happen
probably
quite
right. If
quickly.
you're if you're gonna buy that for the assumed $700 it costs, I'm sure you could spring for an extra $15 for a bit of electronics. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, I kind of that's what I'd love to see like in Lego. I think that would be a really fun one to do.
oh
But
yeah,
but
not bad.
at least we
Hmm.
get Starship, so I can't complain too much. But I thought you'd appreciate that. And all those
Yeah.
episodes are you can buy the box sets, and I found a lot of them too on YouTube. So I think they hold up surprisingly. But there's little gender bias going on there, but it was the '80s. It was definitely there. So the last thing
Yep.
I have for you, Matt, is if somebody wants to get into the business and they kind of fancy themselves a designer and they have some cards and they've figured some cool things out,
Mhm.
advice would you give them if they wanted to, break into it and become a designer? Published designer, because you can be a designer and not be
Sure.
published.
Well, yeah, I mean, these days anyone can attempt to become a designer through Kickstarter,
Right,
right? If
exactly.
you've got a good idea and you're able to flesh it out somewhat. Nowadays, you can't take some some notes and post them on Kickstarter and get any backers. You kind of have to have the game at least 75% done, which is a little unfair to the total neophyte designer, but you never know. If you only need $1,000 to do it, you might get there.
Right.
But I would say I broke into the business through judging events. Actually, I
Okay.
was living in Seattle when Magic came out, and I was one of the only people who bothered to read the rule book. And so I started hosting events at a local game club. And Wizards of the Coast noticed that and offered me a job to be the uh, the the head tournament judge at their brand new tournament center. So
Interesting.
I got in. That was definitely the foot in the door, and that eventually led to some design assignments and working a little bit on Pokemon, things like that, mostly in customer service, but just getting in there, seeing how it's done. So I would
Right.
say judging is a good one because that shows that you are super familiar with the game and you're good with rules. Doing the demo team gives you a chance to show off your skills. A very good demo person is very easy to spot. So just these little things can get you noticed. And then when certain things come up, you'll hear about them because you're already linked in with the company, probably on a private Slack channel because you might be a play tester, you might be a demo crew, things like that. But there are ways to get seen. And when a game company has a need for someone with your skills, they might come calling. Another thing I sometimes tell people is editing. That's something that is a good way to kind of to break in because game companies always are looking for editors. So that can be another good way to come in.
Excellent. Excellent. Well,
Mhm.
this has been a lot of fun, Matt. I'm super excited to see where we go from here. I mean, Vampire is a lot of fun. I'm not familiar with the world, but I found the card game very accessible and got up and running very quickly.
Cool.
So
Great.
I'm really excited to see where the rest of the games take us. So thank you so
Mhm.
much.
All right. Thanks for having me on your show.
Awesome. So thanks for being here. Be sure to check out Matt. He's going to be on the panel. We're doing the whole vampire panel, and we'll talk about things there as well. So, and I'm sure you're going to be at Morphin Meet as we discuss probably more in depth about the deck builder and things that went on behind the scenes. So, be sure to check those out.